On February 1, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile. His arrival initiated a new state mechanism. The death penalty formed its structural foundation. 14 days later, on February 15th, this machinery activated. The physical trigger pulled on the roof of a Tehran school. 4 high-ranking generals of the deposed Shah stepped onto the tar paper. Reza Naji stood among them. Guards pushed the targets against the brick parapet. The firing squad raised their standard-issue G3 rifles in unison. A synchronized point-blank volley followed. The sharp, acoustic echo of the gunfire bounced off the concrete walls of the courtyard below. Logistics relied on strict improvisation. The execution site was the Rifa School. This specific building operated as Khomeini's temporary headquarters. The killing took place directly beneath his windows. Death functioned as a direct instrument of personal authority. The condemned stood before the rifles in their original clothes. Men died in the exact military uniforms or torn civilian suits they wore during the initial arrest. A standardized system of prison garments did not yet exist. The protocol bypassed standard processing entirely. This rooftop event established a new operational standard. Formal execution grounds required preparation, transport, and time. The revolutionary apparatus discarded these metrics. Any enclosed space mutated into a scaffold. Prison courtyards, empty lots, and flat roofs provided sufficient parameters. The procedure demanded zero infrastructure. Armed men. A solid barrier. A target. Spatial proximity eliminated bureaucratic delays. Sentences required no holding cells. Guards marched the convicted directly to the nearest perimeter wall. The firing squad executed the targets without hesitation. To put generals against a wall, the regime required a mechanism of legal justification. Judge Sadegh Khalkhali engineered the revolutionary courts as a high-speed processing plant. How do you legalize the elimination of a political opponent in 60 minutes? You build a tribunal where the indictment, the verdict, and the appeal fuse into a single session. Khalkhali presided over these makeshift courtrooms with strict mechanical efficiency. He rapidly recited broad accusations. The primary charges included spreading corruption and loyalty to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The accused attempted to speak. Khalkhali ignored them. He signed the execution orders instantly. The warrants lacked official state seals. Guards received only pieces of plain paper covered in hurried handwriting. This system completely bypassed the core evidentiary rules of Sharia law. The revolutionaries had officially promised to restore traditional Islamic jurisprudence. Traditional law demanded multiple witnesses and careful deliberation. Khalkhali optimized purely for terminal velocity. Arrests supplied the raw material for this conveyor belt. Revolutionary militias operated without formal warrants. Armed groups pulled targets from homes, offices, and street corners. The intake system prioritized specific administrative assets. Senior military commanders, intelligence operatives from SAVAK, high-ranking police chiefs. Transports bypassed standard civilian jails. Guards routed these prisoners directly into the tribunal holding areas. The new government required maximum throughput to secure immediate political control. Investigators gathered no evidence. Defense attorneys did not exist. The maximum duration of a typical trial was 60 minutes. These 60-minute tribunals were not spontaneous grassroots initiatives. They executed the precise architectural blueprint of Ruhollah Khomeini from the first days of February 1979. Standard 20th century overthrows followed a predictable sequence. A provisional authority, a transition period, the slow drafting of constitutional codes. Iran bypassed the entire protocol. There was zero legal handover. The absence of a transition period functioned as a calculated engineering step. The new leadership bypassed the construction of standard judicial frameworks, radically distinguishing the Islamic Revolution from previous geopolitical shifts. Violence instantly replaced executive institutions. The regime filled the administrative vacuum with terror through direct systemic directives, not through post-revolutionary street chaos. Ruhollah Khomeini authorized immediate physical elimination. The apparatus required maximum operational speed to secure control. Hangings and firing squads provided the necessary efficiency. Target lists prioritized anyone categorized as a systemic threat. Capital punishment ceased to serve as a standard penal consequence. Executions became the primary foundational instrument of the new government. Physical elimination under Khomeini's directives solved only the first structural problem. The state apparatus immediately repurposed the corpses for a second objective: media paralysis. It began in private living rooms. Families had absolutely no prior knowledge of the secret arrests. Relatives discovered the executions only by watching morning broadcasts on state television. Why would a new regime broadcast documented evidence of its own massacres? To permanently erase any thought of a royalist restoration among the Shah's surviving loyalists. The terror required public verification. Execution squads deliberately left the fresh corpses on the pavement. The bodies remained in plain sight for several hours before the transport trucks finally arrived. A physical message for random passers-by. Then the state press took over the distribution. Front pages blasted grainy black and white photographs of bloodied bodies directly into the minds of millions of citizens. This operational transparency was a cold, engineered calculation. The apparatus publicly eradicated the old system to destroy any remaining will to resist. Former officials required no formal written warnings from the new authorities. They simply looked at the newsstands and saw the immediate physical consequences of their past affiliations. Absolute fear paralyzed the entire nation. Daily press publications demanded a continuous supply of bodies. By 1980, schoolyards could no longer handle the volume. The logistics of death required permanent infrastructure. Authorities relocated execution operations to closed facilities. Evin prison in Tehran, Qasr prison. In 1979, militias executed targets right on the streets. By 1980 and 1981, the revolutionary apparatus optimized the protocol. The Shah constructed Evin in 1972 to isolate political dissidents. The new administration weaponized the existing architecture. They exponentially increased its throughput capacity. The facility became the primary industrial node of the state. Judge Sadegh Khalkhali generated a continuous flow of death warrants. The revolutionary courts dispatched batches of condemned individuals daily. Transport trucks breached the perimeter. The heavy clank of Evin's metal gates severed all acoustic and physical contact with the outside world. Guards unloaded the human cargo. Administrators processed the inmates and distributed them across designated holding blocks. Behind high concrete walls, executioners operated in uninterrupted cycles. Firing squads reached their physical limits. Executions devolved into a standardized daily prison shift. Personnel clocked in. Quartermasters distributed ammunition rations. Shooters systematically executed the next batch of prisoners against the courtyard wall. Faced with an endless flow of inmates, the courts were forced to ration death in 1981. But the conveyor belt malfunctioned. How to digest thousands of death sentences per month? The administration switched to the batch processing of humans. By the summer, security forces executed up to 10,000 arrests every 30 days. Prison capacity hit a hard limit. Thousands of new prisoners flooded the holding blocks after the political clashes of 1981. The Mujahideen-e-Khalq opposition supplied a relentless feed of targets. The execution protocol shifted to rapid mechanical processing. Guards marched a group into the kill zone. Rifles discharged a synchronized volley. Handlers immediately dragged the bodies away. The next group stepped directly into the fresh pools of blood. Multi-hour execution cycles turned death into exhausting manual labor. The thick scent of burnt gunpowder and copper stagnated in the confined spaces. The air did not clear for hours. Morality never threatened the terror apparatus. Logistics did. Even with zero emotional pauses, the squads fell behind the arrest rate. A single batch of 10 targets required 10 designated shooters and 20 rounds of ammunition. Even operating around the clock, the firing squads of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps hit the limits of human endurance. The mechanics were rigid. Execution zones were permanently fixed inside the prison walls. Operations ran late into the night or during the pre-dawn hours. The corridors were empty. Movement was controlled. Guards extracted prisoners from their cells and pushed them into the staging area. Available space dictated the posture, standing against a concrete wall or kneeling on the floor. Marksmen took their positions at a measured distance. The protocol was absolute. Aim directly at the chest. Destroy the heart and the lungs. Secure an instant kill. But anatomy resisted the protocol. Targets routinely survived the initial volley. The firing squad method failed the basic logistics of mass extermination. It was unreliably messy. It was dangerously loud. Bodies absorbed the impacts and writhed on the floor. The physical exhaustion of the executioners compounded with every botched round. Blood made the concrete slick, nerves frayed. The process dragged out. Administrators implemented strict control measures. Guards systematically applied tight blindfolds before the condemned ever left their holding cells. The thick fabric served a calculated purpose. It eliminated vision, but more importantly, it stripped away spatial awareness and crushed the fundamental will to resist. When the primary volley failed, the system required a manual override. The deafening crack of a single pistol shot tore through the pre-dawn silence. A designated marksman stepped forward to deliver the point-blank finishing round. The search for a cleaner execution protocol forced the administration of Evin and Gohardach prisons to repurpose their warehouse spaces. Engineers designed the new mechanical setup for absolute simplicity, but the biological process of dying stretched into agonizing minutes. Why did the noose replace the bullet? Execution quotas crushed the firing squads. Hanging maximized the facility's spatial limits and systematically broke the minds of the survivors. Maintenance crews cleared out the underground storage rooms. They welded steel I-beams across the concrete ceilings. Personnel rigged parallel rows of heavy hemp rope. Guards marched the condemned down into the basements in tight formations. Blindfolds stayed on. Wardens secured the slip knots directly over the trachea. Then they kicked the wooden support platforms away. The sharp creak of the collapsing wood echoed through the ventilation shafts. Inmates in the neighboring holding cells listened. The Iranian penal system ignored standard execution mathematics. Wardens omitted the traditional long drop calculations designed to snap the cervical vertebrae. This was a short drop strangulation protocol. The rope simply compressed the airway and blocked the carotid arteries. Without a calculated kinetic drop, clinical death by asphyxiation takes between 10 and 20 minutes. Bureaucratic optimization erased the executioner's physical fatigue. The guards simply walked away. For the victims, the procedure mutated into prolonged physiological torture. Suspended inches above the floor, the condemned fought for oxygen. The violent sounds of their suffocation saturated the underground blocks. It paralyzed the remaining prisoners with pure psychological terror. A 9mm projectile destroys the human brainstem in 3 milliseconds. The short drop noose stretched the biological shutdown to 1,200 seconds. Replacing a dozen riflemen with a few guards turned executions into a continuous conveyor belt. Technicians installed multiple parallel ropes along the ceiling girders. 10 nooses hung side by side. One overseer operated the entire mechanism. The administration drastically reduced the active personnel. This calculated staff reduction minimized psychological damage to the guards. Wardens transferred the sheer terror of the process entirely onto the dying victims. The new protocol eliminated operational downtime. No resetting firing positions. No clearing jammed rifles. Guards marched the first group inside. The trapdoor released. While the condemned asphyxiated, the next batch waited right behind the steel doors. Handlers cut the corpses down. They cleared the floor in under 2 minutes. The cycle repeated. A rifle volley echoes across city blocks. It exposes the exact time of death to the outside world. The noose solved this acoustic vulnerability. Strangling generates barely any decibels. By removing the deafening blast of gunpowder, the administration shielded their own executioners from the auditory trauma of mass murder. Concrete walls absorbed the final gasps. Gunshots no longer sounded. A body dangled 20 feet above a busy intersection. Evin prison hid its slaughter underground. On the city squares, the regime deployed a public theater of intimidation. Why did the regime need spectators? The mechanics of terror demanded an audience. Public executions bound the witnesses together with collective fear. Ordinary people walking to buy morning bread suddenly became involuntary accomplices to state murder. Guards dragged a man with bound hands into the center of the plaza. A loudspeaker crackled. An officer publicly announced his crimes against the state. There were no traditional gallows. The authorities repurposed ordinary construction equipment to execute their own citizens right in the middle of residential neighborhoods. Heavy Japanese Kato truck cranes rolled into the streets. Yesterday, they lifted steel girders. Today, they served as mobile scaffolds. The diesel engine roared. A heavy mechanical hum vibrated over the hushed crowd. The hydraulic boom extended upward. The rope snapped tight. The planners chose these specific urban locations to maximize exposure. Executions deliberately blocked major traffic arteries. They paralyzed the routine. Shopkeepers and pedestrians had no choice but to stare at the suspended corpse. The violent visual shock broke the will of the local residents. Exactly 3,000 people stood in the square. The crowd watched. Executioners spoke 0 words. Officers read no verdicts. No official announcements echoed over the loudspeakers. The cranes lifted the bodies in absolute mechanical silence. Visualizing death on the streets rewired the behavior of millions. Physical terror embedded itself directly into the daily routine. Heavy machinery operated next to grocery markets and public transit stops. A public hanging eliminated the target, but it also systematically dismantled the social bonds among the survivors. In a capital of 6 million residents, chronic paranoia became a mandatory survival reflex. Neighbors exchanged brief, cautious glances in the stairwells. People refused to speak. One misplaced sentence carried a lethal risk. The constant proximity of state violence altered fundamental human reactions. It completely erased basic trust between citizens. Yet the public theater of intimidation reached its operational limit. The prison administration initiated preparations to completely isolate the execution processes from the public eye. By the early 1980s, the state apparatus recognized a logistical flaw. Publicity bred political martyrs, but enforcing total isolation inside Evin and Gohardsh prisons generated a critical overcrowding crisis. How does a penal system process thousands of political prisoners simultaneously? The answer is conveyor belt identification and 1-minute loyalty checks. A single detainee stepped out of the holding cell. Guards matched the physical face to a paper file. Next room. A magistrate asked 2 questions. Past activities. Loyalty to Ruhollah Khomeini. No evidence. No lengthy investigations. The committee applied rapid judicial templates established earlier by Sadegh Khalkhali. Infrastructure dictated this extreme velocity. Evin prison had a maximum structural capacity of 3,200 inmates. The state crammed over 15,000 living bodies into that perimeter. Thousands of prisoners occupied the exact same blocks simultaneously. Space vanished. Cells suffocated. The administration had to clear the operational backlog. Once a committee issued a verdict, guards carried out the execution without a single minute of delay. Physical execution simply cleared the backlog. Total erasure dismantled the identity. While Evin and Gohardsh prisons choked on surplus inmates, the administration engineered a new protocol: unrecorded disappearance. Midnight in a quiet prison block. A guard stops at a cell. He shouts a name from a clipboard. The tone is dry, businesslike. The prisoner steps into the corridor. The steel door clicks shut. An empty space remains on the floor. The state provided 0 official explanations. Logistics suggest guards utilized isolated sectors for hangings and firing squads, but the exact execution method no longer mattered. Uncertainty operated as the primary weapon. Clinical psychology defines this mechanism as ambiguous loss. When the state eliminates a target without returning a corpse or issuing documents, the human brain cannot process the finality. The grief mechanism short circuits. Relatives outside the walls received zero notifications. Authorities withheld the bodies. Dump trucks moved the victims to barren wastelands, like the Khomeini cemetery. Bulldozers carved out unmarked graves in the dark. Crews buried the targets in mass trenches. No names. No identification tags. The regime deleted their final physical coordinates from reality. Closure became biologically impossible. Families kept waiting for decades. To eliminate physical overcrowding and maintain absolute silence, Evin prison engineered a continuous conveyor belt of death. How do you ensure a non-stop flow of executions under strict secrecy? The answer is pre-prepared facilities and immediate body removal. The protocol eliminated waiting lists. Guards escorted isolated prisoners directly to the execution zones. Groups moved blindfolded. The system required maximum speed. Ropes hung from ceilings, pre-prepared in enclosed courtyards. Firing squads stood in fixed positions. The method did not matter. Only the processing time mattered. Platforms dropped. Rifles fired. No pauses. Clearance crews detached the bodies immediately. Guards cleared the floor. The next group stepped in. The logistics demanded extreme physical endurance. The sheer volume of victims caused profound physical exhaustion among the prison staff. Commanders implemented a mandatory rotation of executioners during the night. Men grew tired. The system did not. Logistics extended beyond the restricted prison walls. Removal teams loaded bodies onto transport vehicles. Trucks departed for the Khomeini cemetery and other classified zones. Workers dumped the dead into unmarked mass graves. The heavy scent of freshly dug earth hung over the trench perimeters. No names. No markers. The state issued zero advance notifications to the relatives. By 1988, this silent conveyor reached peak operational capacity. The border war ended. The state shifted focus inward. The isolation was absolute. Inside Evin and Gohardasht prisons, hanging became the primary extraction method. The cycle started with a tribunal. 1 minute per prisoner. 60 seconds to determine survival or execution. No appeals. Guards immediately escorted the condemned directly to the execution halls. The rooms operated on strict timelines. Executioners lined up the targets. They secured the nooses. Then came the drop. Dozens of heavy wooden platforms crashed against the concrete floor simultaneously. Crews cut the bodies down. Orderlies cleared the space. Guards immediately marched the next designated group into the room. The setup ran with industrial precision. In just 5 months, this mechanism processed between 4,000 and 5,000 political prisoners. Logistics dictated the hardware. Technicians did not rig ropes individually. They anchored them in continuous overhead rows, specifically calibrated for a simultaneous mass drop. Families grasped the catastrophe only when authorities suddenly canceled all prison visits. By 1989, during Khomeini's final years, the disorganized street shootings of 1979 had evolved. A flawless extermination bureaucracy replaced the early post-revolutionary chaos. What was the primary outcome of this 10-year structural evolution? Total operational control. Every method of death became a precisely calibrated administrative tool. State objectives dictated the protocols. Speed required firing squads. Commanders deployed them for small, urgent target groups. High volume required mass hangings. Wardens utilized them to process multiple subjects simultaneously. Logistics dictated the choice. Ropes conserved ammunition. Decades later, the architectural blueprint of this categorized terror would remain the regime's standard protocol for suppressing modern dissidents. The system split death into 2 operational modes: visibility versus silence. When authorities needed to broadcast a warning, they staged public executions. Construction cranes hoisted targets above city intersections. When the intelligence apparatus required zero public friction, they activated silent disappearances. No records, no graves, nothing was accidental. Administrators selected the execution method strictly as a function of state utility.